Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
There's a moment, and you know the one I'm talking about, where you're standing in your own kitchen. Maybe it's early morning. Maybe the coffee's still brewing, and you catch your reflection in the window glass. And for just a second, you don't recognize her. The woman looking back at you. You think, when did she get so tired? Not tired like you need a nap. Tired like you've been holding something for a very, very long time. And nobody asked you to put it down. That moment, that's where we're starting today. Here's what nobody tells you about the years between 55 and 75. Everyone talks about the losses, the health scares, the empty nest, the friends who drift or disappear, the husband who maybe isn't who you thought, or maybe isn't there anymore at all. Everyone names those things. But nobody talks about the other loss. The quiet one. The one that happens slowly, like a candle burning low in a room you stopped checking. The loss of your own story. Somewhere along the way, and I can't pinpoint the exact Tuesday it happened, and neither can you. You stopped being the protagonist of your own life and started being the supporting character in everyone else's. The mother, the caretaker, the one who remembers birthdays and smooths over arguments and asks, "How are you doing?" without ever really expecting anyone to turn and ask it back. You became so good at tending to everyone else's sanctuary that you forgot you were allowed to have one of your own. And now you're standing in that kitchen, and you're tired, and something in you, something old and honest, something that was there before you were anyone's wife or mother or daughter or employee. Something in you is whispering this isn't all there is. That whisper matters. Don't dismiss it. Don't call it a midlife crisis or selfishness or ingratitude. That quiet whisper is wisdom. That's the truest part of you, the part that has been patient for decades, finally clearing her throat. I want to tell you something I've come to believe deeply. After years of sitting with women in their grief, in their confusion, in the aftermath of the lives they expected to have versus the ones that actually showed up. Falling is not failure. I know you know that intellectually. You've probably said it to your children, maybe even to your friends. But do you believe it for yourself? Because there's a difference between the wisdom you can offer and the mercy you'll actually accept. Most of us, and I'm including myself here, we're raised in a story where women don't fall. Or if we do, we get back up fast, we smile through it. We make sure everyone else is okay before we even look at our own scraped knees. We were taught that strength looks like endurance, that grace looks like silence, that love looks like sacrifice without complaint. And maybe there was beauty in that. I don't want to dismiss what your generation was built from. There was real grit in that, real devotion. But here's the unspoken truth we need to sit with for a minute. Surviving isn't the same as rising. You can white-knuckle your way through decades without ever actually healing. You can carry the weight so long it starts to feel like your identity. Like without the burden, you wouldn't know who you were. Some of you reading this have done exactly that. You've survived things you never told anyone the full story of. Things that happened in bedrooms and boardrooms and doctors' offices and holiday dinners where everyone pretended everything was fine. You survived. You kept going. You are remarkable for that. But surviving and rising are two very different journeys. Rising means going back. It means turning toward the thing that knocked you down. Not to be destroyed by it again, but to look it in the eye. To name it. To say, this happened to me, and it matters, and I am not ashamed that it left a mark. Rising is not a return to who you were before the fall. And this is the part I really want you to hear, because it changes everything. You don't go back. The woman you're becoming on the other side of this, she's not a restored version of who you were at 35. She's not trying to reclaim some earlier chapter. She is someone new, someone forged, someone who carries her history not as a wound, but as a source of power she hasn't fully learned to use yet. That woman is already inside you. She's been waiting, honestly, for quite some time. And the work of rising strong, real rising, the kind that changes the quality of your days, the way you hold yourself in the mirror, the way you stop apologizing for taking up space, that work begins with one thing. It begins with telling yourself the truth. Not the polished version. Not the one that makes everyone comfortable at Thanksgiving. The real one. The one with all the complicated feelings still attached. That's where we begin. There's a word that doesn't get used enough when we talk about women's pain. Reckoning, not recovery, not healing, not moving on. Those words all have a kind of forward momentum baked into them. Like you're already halfway to the other side before you've even allowed yourself to feel the full weight of where you are right now. A reckoning is different. A reckoning means you stop walking, you turn around, you look. And I know that sounds terrifying. For some of you, the whole architecture of your daily life has been carefully built around not looking. The business isn't accidental. It's protective. The packed calendar, the constant availability to everyone who needs you, the television left on when the house gets too quiet. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? That particular kind of busy that isn't really about productivity. It's about not sitting still long enough to hear what's living in the silence. Because somewhere in that silence is a conversation you've been postponing. Maybe for years. Maybe for decades. Let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it rather than answer quickly. What is the story you tell yourself about the hardest thing that happened to you? Not the version you tell at dinner parties, or the one you've tidied up for your children, or even the one you whispered to your closest friend over wine. The real version. The one where you weren't graceful. The one where you were angry, or terrified, or so desperately lonely you didn't know how you'd get through a single Tuesday. Most of us have two versions of our own story. The public one and the private one. And the private one, the one we carry like a stone in our chest, that's the one doing all the damage. Because here's what I've learned about unprocessed pain. It doesn't stay in its lane. You don't get to say, I'm not going to feel that, and have it simply obey you. It seeps. It finds other exits. It becomes the sharp word you didn't mean to say to someone you love. It becomes the 2 a.m. wakefulness where your heart is racing over nothing and everything. It becomes the low-grade sadness that settles over a perfectly good afternoon, like weather you can't explain. You didn't cause that sadness. But you are the only one who can walk toward it. I think about a woman, I'll call her Margaret, though that's not her name, who came to me after 31 years of marriage ended. Not dramatically. That's the part that surprised her most. There was no explosion, no affair she could point to, no single catastrophic moment. It was more like a tide going out, slowly, quietly, until one morning she realized the shore was bare and she was standing on it alone. She told me the grief felt embarrassing. Embarrassing? Her word. Because how do you mourn something that didn't break violently? How do you explain to people that you're devastated by something that looked, from the outside, like a mutual and reasonable decision? She'd spent 2 years before she came to me doing what so many of us do, staying busy, being fine, using phrases like it was for the best, and we grew apart with a smile that she'd practiced until it felt almost real. But underneath all that competent grieving was something she hadn't dared look at: rage. She was furious. At him, yes, but more than that, at herself. At the years she'd spent making herself smaller, so there was room for his dreams. At the opinions she'd softened, the ambitions she'd quietly shelved. The version of herself she'd slowly edited down until she barely recognized the original draft. The reckoning, for Margaret, wasn't about the marriage ending. It was about finally admitting how much of herself had quietly ended long before the papers were signed. And the moment she said that out loud, when she stopped calling it growing apart and started calling it what it actually was, something shifted. Not fixed, not healed, but real in a way it hadn't been before. That's what a reckoning gives you. Not relief, exactly, but reality, solid ground. Even if the ground is painful, because you can't build anything on a story you've been pretending is fine. Here's another truth that I think gets buried under a lot of well-meaning self-help language. You are allowed to have complicated feelings about people you love. Read that again. You are allowed to love your children and grieve the version of yourself that disappeared into motherhood. You're allowed to honor your marriage and feel the quiet fury of the compromises that cost you something real. You're allowed to be grateful for your life. And I believe you are grateful genuinely, while also acknowledging that gratitude and grief can live in the same chest without one canceling the other out. We were taught, many of us, that complicated feelings are disloyal feelings. That if you love someone, you don't also resent them sometimes. That if you've had a good life, and maybe by many measures you have, then the sadness is somehow ungrateful, unreasonable, a luxury you haven't earned. That is one of the most damaging lies we were handed, and we passed it on, many of us, without meaning to. The weight we carry isn't just our own pain. It's the permission we never gave ourselves to feel it fully. It's the years of telling ourselves others have it worse as a reason to keep the door shut on our own suffering. It's the way we learned to make our grief small and polite and quick so it wouldn't inconvenience anyone. But grief that isn't felt doesn't disappear. It just goes underground. It becomes the invisible architecture of a life that looks functional on the outside and feels hollow somewhere in the middle. So here is what the reckoning asks of you. And I'm not going to dress it up because you deserve the truth without the ribbon on it. It asks you to stop performing okayness. Not forever, not in every room. You don't owe every person in your life access to your unguarded self. That's not what I'm saying. But somewhere, in some sacred and private corner of your life, you need a place where you can put down the performance. Where you can say, I am not fine, and I haven't been for a while, and I'm not entirely sure who I am now that so much of what defined me has changed. That place might be a journal. It might be a therapist's office. It might be a walk you take alone every morning before the house wakes up. It might be this moment, right now, wherever you are with this voice in your ears. The vessel doesn't matter as much as the willingness to pour into it honestly. Because you can't rise from something you haven't been willing to fully acknowledge you fell from. The rising requires the reckoning first. The light on the other side of this. And I promise you there is light. It doesn't bypass the dark. It comes through it. You are not too old for this. You are not too tired for this. You are not too far gone, too set in your ways, to whatever story you've been telling about why transformation belongs to younger women, or different circumstances, or some other version of your life. You are exactly the right age to do the most important work of your life. And it starts with looking at what you've been carrying, and finally, calling it by its real name. There's a specific kind of mourning that I think some of you have had. Maybe recently, maybe years ago, but you still remember it with the kind of clarity that tells you it mattered. You wake up, and nothing dramatic has happened. No crisis, no revelation, no thunderclap from the universe. The room looks the same. Your life looks the same, but something inside you is different. Quietly, irrevocably different. Like a door that has been stuck for years has finally, without fanfare, swung open just an inch. And you lie there in the early light, and you think, I can't keep doing this the same way. Not with anger. Not even with sadness exactly. Just with a kind of bone, deep clarity that feels almost calm. Like the part of you that's been waiting, patient, persistent, whispering through all those years of surviving, has finally been heard. That morning. That's not a breakdown. That's a beginning. The turning point in a woman's rising rarely looks like what we imagine. We expect transformation to announce itself. We've been fed a cultural story about epiphanies. The dramatic moment, the lightning strike realization, the retreat to some sun-drenched place where everything becomes clear. And maybe for some women it happens that way. But for most of us, the turning is quieter. It looks like a small decision, a sentence you finally say out loud, a boundary you draw not with drama, but with a steady, quiet hand. It looks like saying no to something you've always said yes to out of obligation and noticing, maybe for the first time, that the world doesn't end. It looks like making an appointment for the thing you've been putting off because everyone else's needs kept moving ahead of yours in the queue. It looks like sitting with your own discomfort instead of immediately reaching for something to soothe it away. These small turnings, don't underestimate them. They are not small at all. They are the molecules of a new life, assembling themselves quietly while the old story is still playing in the background. I want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed honestly enough in conversations about women and self-renewal. And that's the guilt. Because here's what happens when you start choosing yourself. When you start taking up the space you deserve. When you start saying, my needs matter, my time matters, my joy matters, the guilt shows up almost immediately. Right on schedule, like it's been sitting in the hallway this whole time, waiting. And the guilt doesn't arrive alone. It brings along its companions, selfishness. Who do you think you are? What about everyone else? And sometimes, most painfully, it's too late for you now anyway. I want you to hear me very clearly on this. That guilt is not your conscience. It is your conditioning. There is a profound difference between the two, and learning to tell them apart might be one of the most liberating skills you ever develop. Your conscience is the voice that keeps you honest and kind and connected to your values. Your conditioning is the voice that enforces everyone else's comfort at the expense of your own humanity. Your conscience would never tell you that you don't deserve peace. Your conditioning will tell you that every single day, many of us, and this is particularly true for women of your generation, who were raised in households and cultures where a woman's worth was measured almost entirely by her service to others, have spent so long listening to the conditioning that we've mistaken it for truth. We've worn it like a second skin, and when we start to shed it, it hurts. Because skin doesn't come off without some rawness underneath. But rawness isn't damage. Rawness is aliveness. It means you're finally feeling something you'd learned to numb. Let me tell you about the moment choosing yourself actually begins. Not the moment you decide to, because decision and action, as you know, can live miles apart from each other. I mean, the moment the choosing becomes real, it begins when you stop waiting for permission. This is the one. This is the thing I want to sit inside of for a moment, because I think it's the hinge everything else swings on. How many of you have been waiting? Waiting for your children to need you less. Waiting for your health to improve. Waiting for finances to settle. Waiting for the right circumstances, the right season, the right version of your life to arrive before you give yourself permission to want something just for you. And underneath all that waiting is a belief so old you might not even know you're holding it. I will tend to myself when everyone else is taken care of. But here's the unspoken truth about that belief. Everyone is never fully taken care of. There will always be another need, another crisis, another person who requires what you have to give. The waiting room never empties. And if you've made your own becoming contingent on it emptying, you will wait forever. The permission you're waiting for is not coming from out there. It was yours to give all along. Now I want to talk about what rising actually looks like in the body. Because we spend so much time in our heads about this, analyzing, planning, reading, listening, that we forget the turning has to come into the physical world eventually, into actual days, into real choices. Rising strong doesn't mean reinventing yourself from scratch. I want to dismantle that particular pressure because it stops so many women before they even begin. The idea that transformation has to be total, that you have to quit your life and move to a cottage in Vermont and take up painting and emerge as an entirely different creature. Some women do dramatic things, and if that calls to you, I'm not dismissing it. But for most women, rising looks like reclaiming what was always yours, piece by piece. It looks like returning to the version of yourself that existed before you learned to make yourself so convenient for everyone else. Maybe it's a creative practice you abandoned in your 30s because there wasn't time. Maybe it's a friendship that got neglected because you were so absorbed in the demands of family. Maybe it's an opinion you stopped voicing because the pushback was exhausting. Maybe it's simply the experience of an afternoon with no obligation in it. No productivity, no service, no performance. Just you existing in your own company and finding that company worthwhile. These are not small things dressed up as big ones. These are the big things. This is what a life reclaimed actually looks like from the inside. There's something else the turning requires, and I won't pretend it's easy. It requires grieving the years, not drowning in them, not constructing a monument to regret, but genuinely, honestly grieving the time that passed while you were waiting, while you were shrinking, while you were tending everyone else's garden and letting your own go fallow. You're allowed to feel the ache of that. You're allowed to wish it had been different. You're allowed to mourn the woman you might have been if someone had told you sooner that you were allowed to take up space. And this is the movement, this is the pivot. You turn from the grief toward the present. Not because the grief is finished, but because the present is here. And the present contains something the past cannot offer you. It contains choice. Right now, today, you have something irreplaceable the rest of your life. And I don't say that in the glib, motivational poster way that phrase usually arrives. I mean it as a genuine, weighty, beautiful fact. The chapter's still unwritten. The morning's not yet lived. The version of yourself still becoming. She is not behind you. She is ahead. The turning is simply the moment you stop looking over your shoulder long enough to see her. And here's what I want to leave you with before we move into the final part of this. You don't have to be ready. Readiness is another story we tell ourselves to stay comfortable in the waiting. The women who rise aren't the ones who felt ready. They're the ones who chose to begin anyway, trembling, uncertain, still carrying some of the old weight, and trusted that the path would reveal itself under their feet as they walk. You have survived things that would have finished someone less resilient. You have loved fiercely and given generously and held your world together through circumstances that asked everything of you. Now it's time to ask something of yourself. Not more sacrifice. Not more endurance. Something sweeter than that. It's time to ask, what does my rising look like? And then, and this is everything, it's time to begin. I want you to imagine something with me. Not a fantasy. Not a vision board. Something more honest than that. Imagine a version of you, maybe 5 years from now, maybe less, who wakes up in the morning and the first feeling that arrives isn't dread or obligation, or that low hum of anxiety that's become so familiar you've stopped noticing it's there. The first feeling is something quieter, something that takes a moment to name because you're not entirely used to it yet. It's ease. Not a perfect life. Not a life without loss or difficulty or the ordinary complicated textures of being human. But a life where you are no longer a stranger to yourself. A life where the woman in the kitchen window, the one we talked about at the very beginning, looks back at you and you recognize her. You know her. And more than that, you're glad she's there. That woman is not a fantasy. She is not reserved for the lucky or the young or the women whose lives broke more neatly than yours. She is the inevitable destination of the work you are willing to do right now, in this season, with the exact life you are actually living. She is where the rising leads. Let's talk about what the rising actually feels like from the inside. Because we've talked about the falling, and the reckoning, and the turning. But the rising has its own particular texture. And I want you to know it when it arrives so you don't mistake it for something else. The rising doesn't feel like triumph at first. That's the thing nobody warns you about. It feels at first like uncertainty. Like standing in a room with the furniture rearranged. Everything is still there, but nothing is exactly where you expect it. You reach for the old habits, the old coping mechanisms, the old story about who you are and what you're worth, and they're not quite where you left them. And that disorientation, it can feel for a moment like you've made a mistake you haven't. That disorientation is the feeling of expansion, of a self that is genuinely growing into new territory. And just like any growing thing, a plant reaching toward light, a muscle asked to work in a new way, there is a necessary and temporary discomfort in the stretch. Stay in the stretch, because on the other side of that disorientation is something that will surprise you with its simplicity. Not fireworks, not a dramatic revelation, just a quiet, settled sense of, oh, this is what it feels like to be on my own side. I want to say something directly to the women who are reading this and feeling, beneath the hope, a very particular kind of fear. The fear that it's too late. I know that fear. I've sat across from it in so many women who were right where you are. Women who had spent so long inside the story of, I've missed my window, that they couldn't see what was actually standing right in front of them. And I want to address it not with platitudes, but with something real. Here's what the research tells us. And here is what my own experience, sitting with women across all stages of life, confirms without exception. The women who do their deepest, most transformative work in their 50s, 60s, and 70s don't do it despite their age. They do it because of it. Because by this point in life, you have something that younger women are still acquiring. You have evidence. You have lived through enough to know that you are survivable, that grief doesn't finish you, that the thing you were most afraid of, the loss, the ending, the change you thought you couldn't bear, you bore it. You are here. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, extraordinary. And that knowledge, the bone deep, experientially earned knowledge that you are more resilient than your fears have ever given you credit for. That is the foundation that the rising gets built on. Not optimism, not affirmations, evidence. The irrefutable record of a woman who has been tested and is still here, still feeling, still reaching toward something better. That is power. Real, unshakable, hard-won power. Now I want to talk about what you build in the rising, because this is where it gets beautiful. The rising is not just about healing what was broken. It is about discovering, and I choose that word carefully because it is genuinely a discovery, not a construction. What was always true about you that you never had the space or permission to fully inhabit? There are women who rise into creativity they had buried since girlhood, who pick up a paintbrush or a pen or a camera and find that something in them recognizes it like coming home. Not because they're becoming someone new, but because they're finally becoming someone old. The girl they were before the world told her what she was supposed to be instead. There are women who rise into voice, who discover that the opinions they'd been softening for decades, the truths they'd been editing down to make everyone comfortable, have an audience, have weight, have a right to exist in the full air without apology. Who find that speaking their truth doesn't fracture their relationships, it filters them, keeps the ones that are real, releases the ones that were only maintained by their silence. There are women who rise into presence, who stop living 3 steps ahead of themselves, always managing, always anticipating, always preparing for the next need, and start actually inhabiting the moments they're in. Who sit at a table with people they love and actually feel the warmth of it, rather than cataloging what still needs to be done. And there are women who rise into solitude, who discover, maybe for the first time, that their own company is not something to be endured between obligations, but something to be genuinely, tenderly enjoyed. who find their own silence to be not empty but full, a sanctuary they had been locked out of for years, finally open. Your rising will look like yours. It won't look like anyone else's template. And part of the work is giving yourself permission to let it be what it actually is, rather than what you think it should be. There is one more thing I want to give you before we close this conversation. And it's the thing I believe matters most. I want to give you a new relationship with your own story. Not a revised version that erases the hard parts. Not a reframe that turns every wound into a gift. Because sometimes pain is just pain, and it doesn't have to be prettied up to deserve acknowledgement. But a relationship with your story where you are the author. Where the narrative isn't something that happened to you, but something you are actively, consciously, courageously writing. Because here is the unspoken truth that I have watched transform women's lives, quietly and completely. Once they truly let it in, the falling was never the end of your story. It was always just a chapter. A hard one, maybe the hardest one, but a chapter. And chapters turn. You are not the sum of what has been done to you. You are not the years you spent waiting, or the dreams you set aside, or the version of yourself you had to suppress to survive a particular season. You are not your grief, or your regret, or your fear of what it might mean to actually want something for yourself again. You are the woman who is still here, still feeling, still hoping even when the hoping feels dangerous, still drawn towards something more depth, more truth, more genuine connection to your own life. Or you wouldn't have stayed this long in this conversation. That draw is everything. That pull toward more aliveness is your compass. And it has been pointing true this whole time, even when you couldn't hear it over the noise of everything else. So here is where I'll leave you. Not with a list of steps, not with homework or a challenge or a call to action dressed up in empowerment language. Just with this, tonight or tomorrow morning, or in whatever quiet moment you can carve out of the life you are living, find 5 minutes that belong entirely to you. Not 5 minutes of productivity. Not 5 minutes of self-improvement. Just 5 minutes of honest company with yourself. And in that space, ask one question. Let it sit without forcing an answer. Let it work on you slowly the way real questions do. The question is this: if I were no longer afraid of what I might want, what would I want? Don't edit the answer. Don't make it practical or reasonable or palatable for anyone else's consumption. Let it be as large or as strange or as tender as it actually is. Because that answer, the unedited one, that is the first word of the next chapter. And the next chapter is yours to write. All of it. Every morning that you choose yourself a little more than the day before. Every boundary drawn with a steady hand. Every creative act, every honest conversation, every moment of genuine rest that you allow without guilt. Every time you look in that kitchen window and the woman looking back doesn't feel like a stranger. That is the rising. Not a single moment, but 1,000 small ones, accumulating into a life that finally fits the full shape of who you are. You were never too much. You were never too late. You were never past the point of becoming. You were just waiting for the morning when you believed it yourself. That morning can be today. It can be right now. Rise.